What an emotionally challenging week we've all endured. Since last Friday at this time, we've lost three great giants, three remarkable leaders, three magnificent men. Our very own teacher and friend, Rabbi William Millen, Zichrono Livracha, Rosh Yeshiva, Harav David Feinstein, Zichrono Livracha, and Chief Rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha. As I reflect upon these three Gedolim, each very different from the other, I feel a tremendous sense of loss and sadness, but also feel a tremendous sense of gratitude for having the pleasure of living in a world impacted by these three special men. I dedicate my words of Torah today in their memory. Chazal say in Masechet Kala Rabasi, Tanu Rabbanan, B'shas ptiras chacham kol ha'am chayavin behespedo. When a chacham dies, everyone is obligated to eulogize him. Some of us knew these rabbis. Some of us knew of these rabbis. Some of us may not even have known of them at all. But they were chachamim. They were wise people who taught us Torah, and therefore kol ha'am chayavim behespedam. All of us are obligated to pause and mourn, to pause and reflect, to pause and give thanks, to pause and pay tribute to these great Torah personalities. Fortunately, we have a model to follow in learning what it means to eulogize, since perhaps by divine providence, it is in our parsha this week that we see Avram do just that for his beloved wife. Our parsha describes the incredible loss of Sarah Imenu and the reaction of a bereaved husband, Avram Avinu, after losing his love and his life partner and his entire world. The pasuk which describes his reaction tells us that he did two things. Not at all surprisingly, he cried and he eulogized. Vayavo Avraham lispod l'Sarah velivkosa. Lispod velivkos. These are two natural human reactions to loss that are an expression of two facets of mourning, emotion and intellect. Avram cried, thereby expressing his emotions, no matter how spontaneous, out of control, or scattered, or how nonsensical, or how raw they may have been. Avram also eulogized, thereby expressing his thoughts that were more organized and more planned and precise and polished. This week, we too, each in our own way, have experienced both facets of mourning as we react to the loss of these three great leaders. Over the course of this week, we surely had our livkos moments, our moments of spontaneous emotional reaction and outpouring. And we surely had our lispod moments, our moments to participate in thoughtful, organized gatherings of hespedim and tribute, whether in print or on Zoom, from all corners of the globe. Delving a bit deeper into Avram's moment of crying and eulogizing can perhaps help us to glean some insight into our own process of mourning this week. Most of the commentators focus on the seemingly mistaken order of the words, lispod velifkos, to eulogize and then to cry, which seems to run counter to human nature, which would be to cry first and only then to eulogize. While there are many fascinating answers to this question, today I would prefer to focus on another aspect of the pasuk, which is the first word, vayavo. Vayavo Avraham, lispod l'Sarah velivkosa. Avram came in order to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her. The plain meaning of the pasuk would seem to be that the Torah is telling us that geographically, Avram came from somewhere to the area of Kiryat Arba in order to cry for and eulogize Sarah and then bury her. The question that preoccupies the Medrash is where exactly Avram was coming from. The Medrash Rabbah ventures two opinions, the burial of Terach or Har HaMoriah, the site of Akedas Yitzchak. Rabbi Levi Amar mikvuraso shel Terach l'Sarah ba. Amar le Rabbi Yossi v'alo mikvuras Terach l'kvuras Sarah hayu shtayim shanim. Elam hechan ba mehar HaMoriah. Rabbi Levi says that he was coming from the burial of Terach. Rabbi Yossi says to Rabbi Levi, how could that be? The burial of Terach took place years beforehand. It must be that he was coming from Har HaMoriah, from the site of Akedas Yitzchak. Later commentators, as well as the thrust of other strands in the Medrash, seem to side with Rabbi Yossi, saying Avram came from Har HaMoriah, from the Akedah to Kiryat Arba, to the burial of Sarah, since it makes more sense chronologically. However, Rav Zalman Sorotzkin in the Sefer Oznaim LaTorah points out that it cannot be that Avram actually came from Har HaMoriah to the burial of Sarah, since we know from the text itself in Parshas Vayera that after the Akedah, He went back to Beersheba. He didn't go to Kiryat Arba. He went from Har Moriah to Beersheba. And now, Vayavo Avraham, Lispod L'Sarah B'Liv Kosa, he comes to Kiryat Arba from, must be Beersheba, not Har Moriah. So what does the Medrash mean by telling us that Avram came to the burial from the Akedah? He concludes that the Pasuk and the Medrash that elaborates on the Pasuk must not have been telling us where Avram came from geographically, but rather where he was coming from mentally and emotionally when he set out to eulogize her. V'chein pirish Rashi v'kvar hirgish bazeh haramban ubier shalashon vayavo perusha po shenit orer Avraham lehesped hazeh v'zeh nikra balashon chachamim bo. It must be that here the word vayavo means what inspired him. Where was he coming from that led him to eulogize her? The question the Medrash is asking about our pasuk, Meheichan ba, where he was coming from, is really telling us, where was Avram coming from? What was he thinking about? What salient feature of Sarah's life dominated his mind? What life experience with his beloved wife stood out at the forefront of his emotions at the time when he prepared to eulogize her? The answer the Medrash gives is that he was thinking about the experience of the Akedah. Rav Sorotzkin explains that as Avram prepared to eulogize Sarah at her funeral, he stood astounded at how Sarah had such a profound impact on her child Yitzchak that she shaped him into the type of person who was able to successfully undergo the experience of the Akedah. Meheichan ba Avram lehespidash shel Sarah. Where did he come from mentally? Mehar Moriah. Hu nisorer lahaspida mehamach zehagadu shemisiras nefesh al kedushas Hashem. He was coming from the place of thinking of this great scene of self-sacrifice and kiddush Hashem and Har Moriah, the Akedah. Shira mibna Yitzchak b'Har Moriah, that he saw his son and her son engage in Har Moriah. V'tala hadavar b'sara v'chinucha. He imagined that the reason why Yitzchak made it to that moment of life is because of Sarah's influence, because of her chinuch, because of her education of Yitzchak. Shekimat kol ha'anashim ha'gedolim hayu lahem imahot gedolot. Very beautiful line, which he says here. Almost every great man came from a great mother. A little bit of a play on the line. Behind every great man, maybe behind every great boy is a great mother. We'll never know what tears Avram shed or what words he actually spoke on that fateful day in Hebron. But what we do know is that as he prepared for that moment, all he could think about was the impact Sarah had on her son's life and on the world. All Avram could think about was, if Yitzchak was capable of accomplishing the Akedah, the hardest moment of his life, it is entirely due to the influence that his incredible mother had upon him. All Avram could think about was how Sarah had raised Yitzchak for 37 years to be such a devoted, kind, spiritual, selfless person that he was able to go up to the Akedah with total devotion and self-sacrifice for Hashem. All Avram could think about was how Sarah had been so successful at conveying to Yitzchak what was most important in life. All Avram could think about was how Sarah had such an impact on her world. That was the preamble, the musing, the thought that shaped the acts of Lispod v'Livkos that were still yet to come. Over the course of this week, there have been scores of opportunities, both locally and internationally, to hear about Rabbis Millen, Feinstein, and Sachs, who, whether from a distance or up close, played a big role in many of our lives. In this age of fast-paced information and interconnectedness, the news and the videos and the articles and the tributes and the Zoom sessions have been almost overwhelming this week. We had a chance to hear so many beautiful words about Rabbi Millen, Zichron Livracha, this past Wednesday at the local communal Zoom Azkara. Many of us had the chance to attend national Hespedim and programs about Rabbi Feinstein and Rabbi Sachs, Zichron Livracha. We're even in the midst of planning a special KMS Shloshim tribute to Rabbi Sachs, with more details coming out in the next few days. There's so much out there that has already been said. There is so much out there yet to be said by people far greater than myself and people far closer to these men than myself. While I have certainly shed tears, lifkos, I do not feel worthy or ready to find the appropriate and fitting words, lispod, to eulogize these three great giants. Nevertheless, I do wish to share with you my own vayavo moment, my own thoughts that preoccupy me as I formulate the words of eulogy that can only come later with the passage of time. That preamble to Hesped, that thought that occupies my mind in this moment is much the same as the thought that occupied Abraham's mind in his moment of Vayavo, as he prepared to eulogize Sarah. The impact those we lost had on us and our family. With that in mind, I'd like to share one way in which each of these three rabbis made an indelible impression upon me, with the hope that the impact they had on me might be inspiring to you as well. I begin with Rabbi William Millen, Zichrono Livracha. Rabbi Millen was a Boston-born student of Rabbi Soloveitchik and lifelong educator who, after teaching in various places, fortunately, spent the bulk of his adult life with Elaine Tibadal L'Chaim Tovim here in Silver Spring. It just so happened that my first Shabbat that I ever spent in KMS, my Praba Shabbos, Rabbi Millen was at KMS as well. It never happened again. In all 5+ years that I've been here, we were never both in KMS for Shabbos again, just at once, as if it were meant to be that we would meet, as if it were bashert that his presence would mold my image of this wonderful community. He was in KMS, right here in this room, because it was Zanvi Lesnoy's bar mitzvah parsha, Parshas Truma 5775, and he had been Zanvi's bar mitzvah teacher. Not only was Rabbi Millen in KMS, but he also led Shachris with his melodic and booming voice from this very shtender. We had a chance to talk for a few minutes that Shabbos, and then thankfully many times after that. I was immediately struck by something about Rabbi Millen, and that was his chen. The Torah that he taught, and the davening that he sung, and the stories that he told were marvelous. The way his eyes lit up as he said a chiddush, the way he shared a memory of the Rav, the way he exuded the excitement of a teachable moment, the way even though he was on in years, he was so energetic in his speaking style, he put his full heart and soul into each word that he spoke, and it came across with such gusto, were all marvelous. But that alone would not have been enough to impact me, since those traits are ones found in many people. The reason he had an impact on me is because it was all conveyed through his chen, a chen that bespoke a deep authenticity, a chen that was uniquely his own. He had a charm that came through in the warmth of his smile and the friendliness and outgoing nature of his personality and the ease of being in his presence. He had so much chen that you couldn't help but be drawn into what he had to say and into feeling close to that which he had to teach. This is not something you can learn or something you can fake, but something that you are blessed with from Hashem. That chen of Rabbi Millen is something I will always remember and something that's made a deep impression upon me. And now for Rav David Feinstein, Zichrono Livracha. For those of you who may not know, Rav David Feinstein was the Rosh Yeshiva and MTJ on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where he took over from his illustrious father, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, about 35 years ago. He was 91 years old when he passed away, one of the Zikan HaRabbanim, one of the most respected rabbis and poskim in this country and in the world. Although I can't say that I knew him, I had the privilege of being in his presence a number of times, and there was something that came through to me in all the times I saw him that left an impression and impacted me, and that was his utter humility and simplicity. I'd like to share just two of those stories. When I first started college at YU, I really wanted to visit the famed Lower East Side. One Friday, I went with a friend to walk the streets and see what it looked like. While I was there, I said to my friend, I'd really love to see MTJ, where Rav Moshe taught and wrote and changed the world. We didn't know where MTJ was located and didn't have smartphones to look up the address, so we found it the old-fashioned way, by asking for directions. I saw two frum men leisurely walking on the street near a fruit stand, and so I went up to one of them and I said, "Excuse me, do you know where MTJ is?" He pleasantly responded by telling me that it was just up the block and that Mincha would be starting shortly. He wished me a good Shabbos and he went along his way. But half an hour later, my friend and I walked into the Beis Medrash of MTJ, and when I looked towards the front of the room, I noticed that the man who gave me directions was none other than the Rosh Yeshiva, Rav David Feinstein. Oh boy. By this time, he was no longer sauntering down the street, surrounded by fruit stands and passers-by, but surrounded by students and admirers and people with shilas in his special seat of honor in front of the yeshiva. I was so embarrassed. I had not even known what he looked like. I foolishly asked Rav David Feinstein, the Rosh Yeshiva, the son of Rav Moshe, if he knew where his own yeshiva was. It hit me then and there just how humble a man he was. He had no pretenses, no airs, no demands. He could have said to me, "Don't you know who I am?" He could have instinctively given me an odd look. He could have said, "Yes, I know where MTJ is. Actually, I'm Rav David Feinstein, the Rosh Yeshiva." He could have looked like a Rosh Yeshiva with a special hat and a long coat and an entourage of students fawning all over him, but he had none of that. He went about his business of being great instead of acting great. And that kind of sincere humility spoke volumes to me. The second story took place at the wedding of a friend of mine years later. I was in the very empty lobby of a wedding hall in Brooklyn talking on the phone while everyone else was upstairs in the ballroom dancing in one of the dance sets. I noticed that Rav David and his wife were leaving. I quietly watched from the sidelines, knowing that as much as you can learn from the Sfarim of a Gadol, you can learn more from their actions. I saw him go to the coat room, and when the attendant handed him the coats, he put his coat down and helped his wife on with her coat first, coming behind her, holding up the coat, waiting for her to put in each of her arms and lifting it over her. It was such a simple act, but one that spoke volumes to me again about his kindness and sincerity and humility. He was from one of the most illustrious Torah families. He had earned fame and prestige in his own right. He had so many people around him just waiting to raise him up on a pedestal and treat him like royalty. His hundreds of Talmidim upstairs at the wedding would have loved to get him his coat or pull around his car. He could have put on his own coat first or expected his wife to help him with his coat because of his stature as Vigado. But he didn't. He carried himself with the utmost of humility, and that was 100% sincere. He wore a simple suit like everyone else, walked on the street like everyone else, helped his wife with her coat like any husband should, and never put on a show to fit the image of greatness that he was supposed to exude. He spoke quietly, learned Torah, helped people, and involved himself with the needs of the community, but never with politics or controversy. The fact that he's less known in our community is perhaps one of the outcomes of his humility. That level of innate humility, sincere humility, and simplicity is not something you see every day, but is something that marks a true Gadol, and therefore it made such a deep impression upon me. And now finally, for Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha. I never had the privilege of meeting Rabbi Sacks. His Shabbat visit here to KMS predated me, and his book signing took place while I was out of town. How I continue to kick myself for missing that wonderful moment. And yet, by reading thousands upon thousands of his words and listening to dozens of his talks, I feel like I knew him all my life. What a towering figure who literally changed the face of Jewish learning and became the Jewish voice in the world to all kinds of people, old and young, royal and simple, academic and lay, Jewish and non-Jewish, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, and unaffiliated, the like. He became a significant voice in my world as well. Rarely do I give any important shiur without at some point coming back to something Rabbi Sacks wrote or said. I was shaking last Motzei Shabbos when I found out about his passing, since only moments earlier in my Shabbos afternoon shiur I had just read a passage from him and then recited his name in the refuah bracha of my silent Amidah for Mari. He was our spokesperson. He was our mentor. He was our orator who built a palace of words out of the Torah, as someone this week noted. He was our guiding light. He was our role model, and we are lost without him in our world. There is one recurring idea that runs through so much of his writings that made a deep impression upon me, and that is his belief in change. Rabbi Sacks conveys a certain hopeful realism that is unique. Rarely does a person convey the utmost of hope and optimism without seeming wild-eyed, dreamy, or out of touch. Conversely, rarely does a person convey a true understanding of the harsh realities and troubles of the world without ending up sounding pessimistically tragic or cynical. Rabbi Sacks was neither. He was so in touch with the evil in the world and the problems that we face. Not only was he in touch with them, but he felt them deeply within his soul to the point that it actually affected him. He never shied away from these real issues. He never hid from them. He tackled them head on And not just in the realm of ideas in the ivory tower, but in the real realms of life, standing behind and spearheading programs of actual change. He faced the evils of the world with the most sincere belief that, as his daughter Gila said in her eulogy this week, every problem is solvable and workable. He was of the opinion that no matter how bad things are, we can make changes, large and small. And as he says in his great work, Letter in the Scroll, we must spend our lives fighting against the evil, to put out the fires that engulf the palace in flames, because we are truly capable of change and of making a difference, even if that change happens with one small step at a time, and even if we never live to see that change come to the fullest fruition. As he so incredibly says in his essay on Parshas Chayei in his book Lessons on Leadership, almost on the week of his passing, prophetically writing his own eulogy about his life, he says, and I quote, "Leaders begin with an envisioned future, but they also know that there is a long journey between here and there. We can only reach it one act at a time, one day at a time. There is no miraculous shortcut, and if there were, it would not help. The use of a shortcut would culminate in an achievement like Jonah's gourd, which grew overnight and died overnight. Abraham acquired only a single field and had just one son who would continue the covenant. Yet he did not complain, and he died serene and satisfied because he had begun, because he had left future generations something on which to build. All great change is the work of more than one generation, and none of us will live to see the full fruition, the full fruit of our endeavors. Leaders see the destination, begin the journey, and leave behind those who will continue it. That is enough to endow a life with immortality. For a person like me who often sees things in a bit too much detail and who often strives a bit too much for perfection, it can be very hard not to feel despondent about the world's problems and our own personal problems. It can be hard to actually continue to hope for positive change when you understand how slim the chances are of actually accomplishing it. From my earliest exposure to Rabbi Sacks's writings, I learned that it is possible to feel hope and to believe in change, even when all around you screams the opposite. That has made a deep impression upon me. That has helped provide me with a hopeful and optimistic personality, I hope, and has helped to shape the person that I am today. I could go on and on about each of these leaders. They accomplished so much and will be missed. Today, let us stand back before we get to formal eulogies or full appreciation of the broad scope of the lives of these three rabbinic leaders, and like Avraham before us, plainly live in our own vayavo moment, just contemplating where we're coming from as we think of them. Let us start our process of finding the words to describe the full scope of their lives by simply pausing to contemplate the impact they had upon us. Let that lasting impact be what helps to shape our bechi and our hesped, and most of all, what helps to inspire us and shape our actions and behaviors and the lives that we lead in the days and the years to come. Yehei Zichram Baruch. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and Besorot Tovot, good tidings in the days to come.